Okay, this is the 5 Minute Podcast Review for Friday, May 26, 2017. And as usual, I got 5 podcasts to run through, and the links to all 5 are on your screen. Now, depending on how your podcast player presents things, you might have to flick around a few screens, but usually the links will be on the home screen. So if any podcast catches your interest, use the link on your screen to download and subscribe. Okay, so first podcast is called Am I Funny? And the premise is simple. Here's the host, Leon Shergren, to explain it.
Hi, I'm Leon Shergren, and welcome to Am I Funny? A podcast documenting my attempt to perform stand-up comedy for the very first time, in just 8 weeks. Many people fear public speaking more than death, which I guess makes stand-up comedy one of the most terrifying things a person can do. So yeah, the idea scares me, but for some reason, I am fascinated by it.
I don't mean to terrify you, but if I was going to give any new comedian a piece of advice, here's the piece of advice I would give them. Whatever your first gig is like, never release the audio to anybody.
That's one of Australia's best comedians, Will Anderson. He's one of the many talented comics enlisted to help me over the next 8 weeks to see if I can learn and perform stand-up comedy for the very first time. Oh yeah, and you'll be along for the ride as well.
I've got a very bad feeling about this, Leon.
This is Am I Funny?
Leon's first live gig is scheduled for this Monday, May 29 in Sydney, and it'll be recorded as the next podcast episode. So now's a good time to download Am I Funny and catch up on the 5 existing lead-up episodes. They only run around 19 minutes each, so it's an easy listen. That's Am I Funny, and the link is on your screen. Next podcast is Strangers, and this is a really good podcast series. I've just discovered it. And again, the premise is simple. The idea is that with 8 billion people in the world, most people to us are strangers. So in each episode, the host gets close to someone, a stranger, and we get to experience life through their eyes. A good recent example of this is a series of episodes called Leah in Trumpland. The host, Leah Tao, is very anti-Trump and everything he stands for and can't comprehend why anyone would have voted for him. So she visits a Trump supporter, a stranger, to record an episode. But when I say visit, I mean she goes to her house, she gets drunk with her, she even stays overnight in the spare bedroom. Hours of conversation are condensed into the 1-hour episode and make for genuinely insightful listening. But that's just a recent episode. There are many others going back 6 years, and most have nothing to do with politics. The stories and the people covered are just too many and too diverse for me to cover here, but I'm urging you to hit the link on your screen, scan the episode list, and you'll definitely find more than a few that catch your interest and probably end up making Strangers a regular part of your playlist. It's definitely the best podcast I've heard in terms of giving you a walk in someone else's shoes. So that's Strangers. Definitely check it out. The link is on your screen. Okay, podcast number 3 is Written Inside. This is a series on what life's like in a maximum security prison based on the writings of the prisoners themselves. This is a clip from the preview episode where podcast creator Alex Kotlowitz gives us a bit more of the setup.
We have more people in prison than anywhere else in the world, and yet we understand so little about what it means to spend years of your life locked up, much of your time confined to a small prison cell. I'm Alex Kotlowitz. I'm an author and journalist, and I teach writing at Northwestern University. What's guided my work over the years is a somewhat simple question. How does one live their life, especially those in extraordinary circumstances? Written Inside is a series of stories written by inmates at Stateville Correctional Center, just an hour south of Chicago. Over the course of 8 months, I worked with these inmates on these essays about how they live their lives behind bars. They're these beautifully crafted, poignant pieces written about their prison cells. So we've taken those essays and created a podcast. And since we couldn't ask the inmates, the authors of these essays, to read them, we've asked some actors to help us adapt them for radio.
Each episode of Written Inside focuses on a different aspect of prison life, from making friends to the benefits of being a recluse, the anxiety of meeting a new cellmate, to the lack of privacy, to a battle with cockroaches sharing your cell. Written Inside is an 8-part series, and all 8 episodes are up now. Each episode is short, only around 10 minutes, so it's an easy podcast to listen to for something different without having to make a huge commitment. All right, next podcast is something a bit specialist, though it'll be interesting to anyone with an interest or an involvement in filmmaking. It's called Good, and I think the reason for the name Good is that in the podcast description, the creators describe it as, quote, a pretty good podcast about really good films and filmmakers. This is very much a film industry podcast with a lot of shop talk and interviews with a wide range of film industry players. There are a lot of interviews with directors, including plenty of music video directors, but also episodes on colour grading, sound design, running a film set, pitching, writing treatments, and a whole lot more. If you're in the film and TV production industry, it's a great podcast series, or should I say a good podcast series to listen to hear different perspectives on how others approach it. But I think it's also a good podcast for film students and others looking to get a start in the industry. A big part of the challenge is always just getting experience, which isn't always easy, but listening to a podcast like this is sort of the next best thing, and it's easy to do. Of course, you just hit the link on your screen and you can download Good. Final podcast this episode is The Hookup, and as the name suggests, it's a pretty out there contemporary podcast about all aspects of relationships and hooking up in this online dating era. Each episode covers a different topic, from fetishes to communicable diseases and pretty much everything in between. If I started reading out some of the episode titles, I'd need to stick an explicit rating on this podcast, so I'll just give you the link to The Hookup on your screen, and you can go check out the episodes for yourself. That's it. 5 podcasts in around 5 minutes, and they were Am I Funny?, Strangers, Written Inside, Good, and The Hookup. And in case I haven't mentioned it already, links to all 5 are on your screen. Had I mentioned that already? Maybe I did. Anyhow, also, if you're a new listener to the 5-Minute Podcast Review, don't forget there are plenty of back episodes to check out with a whole lot more podcast suggestions. Otherwise, I will see you in the next episode with another 5 podcasts. Thanks for listening.